sky was moonless, an expanse of black stretching endlessly over the Texas highway. Diesel Joe Mercer, a trucker with 2 decades of experience, had seen his fair share of strange things on the road. He'd heard stories of phantom hitchhikers, ghost lights in the desert, and even monstrous figures lurking in the fog. But none of those stories had ever prepared him for what he was about to experience. It was past 2 a.m., the dead hour when the world seemed to stand still. His 18-wheeler, loaded with canned goods, rumbled down Highway 43, a desolate stretch of road known as the Devil's Backbone. Truckers talked about this highway in hushed tones at truck stops. Some swore they had seen headlights appear and disappear without a trace. Others claimed to have passed identical copies of their own rigs, driven by someone or something that looked just like them. Joe had always brushed off those stories. He had real problems to worry about: bad weather, long hours, and shady rest stops. Ghosts weren't on his radar, but as his headlights cut through the thick fog, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The road was empty. No oncoming traffic. No signs of civilization for miles. He checked his side mirrors. Nothing. Then his CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker 19, you got a copy?" The voice came through distorted, almost distant, like it was traveling through a tunnel of static. Joe frowned and grabbed the mic. "Yeah, this is Diesel Joe. Who's out there?" Silence. Then a deep, ragged breath. "You're not alone." Joe's fingers tensed around the wheel. His eyes flicked to his mirrors again, searching for headlights. Still nothing. "Who the hell is this?" he barked. The radio stayed silent for a long moment before the voice returned, even more warped. "Look behind you." A sharp chill spread through Joe's body. Against his better judgment, he glanced at his side mirror. His own truck was following him. Not another truck of the same model. His exact rig. Same markings. Same dented fender from that accident in Wyoming. Same license plate. His pulse thundered in his ears. That was impossible. His grip on the wheel tightened as he stole another glance. This time he saw the driver. His own face stared back at him. His own eyes, dull and lifeless. His mouth moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Then, just as suddenly, the duplicate truck veered into the fog and vanished. Joe's heart pounded against his ribs. He blinked rapidly, trying to process what he had just seen. "I'm just tired," he muttered under his breath. "That's all. Lack of sleep." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true, and the night was far from over. Joe drove in silence for another 30 minutes, the radio off, his hands tight on the wheel. He needed a break. When he spotted a small gas station up ahead, he pulled in, eager for some coffee and a moment to collect his thoughts. The station was old, its flickering neon sign barely illuminating the cracked pavement. A single pump stood under a rusted awning. The place looked abandoned, but there was an old man sitting outside on a wooden chair, smoking a cigarette. As Joe stepped out of the truck, the man spoke without looking at him. "You shouldn't be out here, driver." Joe stiffened. "What do you mean?" The old man exhaled slowly, the smoke curling around his face. "Strange things happen on this road. Things that don't belong in this world." Joe forced a chuckle, trying to shake the unease settling in his gut. "Yeah? Like what?" The old man turned his head, his eyes sharp. Too sharp. "Like the ones who never make it to their destination." Joe swallowed hard. "You talking about the missing truckers?" The old man nodded. "They don't just disappear. Something takes them." Joe frowned. "You saying there's someone out here hunting truckers?" The old man leaned forward. His face was pale under the gas station lights. "Number, not someone. Something." A long silence stretched between them. Joe shook his head and turned away. "I don't believe in ghost stories." The old man took another drag of his cigarette. "You will." Back on the road, Joe tried to shake off the encounter. He turned on the radio, but all he got was static. An hour passed. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional howl of the wind. Then, a whisper. Joe's breath caught in his throat. It had come from inside the cab. His pulse hammered as he slowly turned his head toward the passenger seat. A man was sitting there. His clothes were filthy, torn at the edges. His face was gaunt, his skin stretched too tight over his bones. His eyes, deep sunken pits, were locked onto Joe. Joe's body turned ice cold. His hands gripped the wheel so hard they ached. The man smiled, revealing blackened teeth. "Mind if I take the wheel?" Joe let out a strangled yell, yanking the wheel. The truck skidded violently. The passenger vanished. Joe fought to regain control, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But the smell of rot lingered. Joe's mind screamed at him to get off the highway. He pushed the pedal to the floor, but no matter how far he drove, the road seemed to stretch endlessly. His fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should. The CB radio crackled. "Diesel Joe, they're coming for you." Joe's stomach clenched. "Who's coming?" A long pause. "The ones who never left." His headlights flickered. The road ahead was no longer empty. Figures stood in the middle of the highway, dozens of them, their eyes hollow, their mouths twisted into grotesque grins. Joe slammed on the brakes. The truck died. Total darkness. The figures advanced, their movements slow, deliberate. The driver's side door swung open. A cold hand gripped his arm. Joe screamed. Then, silence. 2 days later, authorities found Joe's truck abandoned on the side of the road. The engine was running, headlights on, but there was no sign of Joe Mercer. His wallet, keys, and phone were untouched. On the dusty dashboard, a single message was scrawled in jagged letters. "See you on the next ride." To this day, truckers on Highway 43 report seeing a lone rig driving through the night. If you look closely at the driver, you'll see hollow eyes staring back. Frank Carter had been a trucker for 20 years, but nothing prepared him for the horror on Highway 87 that night. At 3 a.m., he spotted a woman standing by the road. Her pale dress fluttered in the wind, but she didn't signal for help. She just stood there, her long hair covering her face. As he passed, her head snapped toward him, her eyes black and hollow. Frank's hands trembled on the wheel. He pressed the gas. But then, in the corner of his eye, the passenger seatbelt clicked. Someone, or something, was in the cab. A whisper brushed his ear. "Keep driving." His stomach dropped. He refused to look. He knew the rule, never look. Then came the knocking, from the trailer, loud, rhythmic, desperate. Frank's freight was government sealed, marked "Do Not Open." He was told never to check inside. Now, something inside was begging to be let out. The radio crackled. A voice whispered, "Frank, open the door." It was his own voice. His headlights flickered. The air inside the cab grew ice cold. In the mirror, he saw something crawling out of the trailer. A shadowy figure, twisted and unnatural. Then, his truck stalled. The dashboard lights flickered wildly. A breathy laugh echoed from the empty passenger seat. Frank's heart pounded as something touched his shoulder. He slammed on the brakes. Silence. Darkness. Then, fingernails scraped across the windshield from the inside. The last thing he saw was a pair of hollow black eyes staring at him through the mirror. The next morning, Frank's truck was found abandoned on the highway, engine running. The trailer was empty. Frank Carter was never seen again. But sometimes truckers on Highway 87 hear whispers on their CB radios. "Keep driving. It's not done yet." And some say, if you drive that highway at night, you might see a rig driving itself. And if you hear knocking from your trailer, don't stop, don't look, just keep driving.